which, by the way, represents a majority of the world's population. Not only that, but if each parent is capital A, capital B, little b, the combinations that could be produced in their children could result in a very wide range of skin shades in just one generation. So, since Adam and Eve were the first people ever, it makes sense to conclude that God placed in them a combination of genes that could produce all different shades of skin we see. Those same combinations would be present in Noah and the 7 other people who boarded the ark. And because God dispersed people at the Tower of Babel, he dispersed the population, thereby isolating gene pools in the different people groups. Over time, different cultures formed in different locations with certain features like skin shade becoming predominant. And here we are today. And since we all go back to Noah and his family, it makes sense that we are all different shades of brown. One race, multiple people groups, just like the Bible teaches. Simplified for sure, but enough said.
It's very easy to understand. That's why you find instances like this. These twins were born in Australia, one dark, one light. These twins were born in England, one dark, one light. When we have children, we have 5 children, they all look a little different to each other. You know why? They all have different combinations of genes. But it all goes back to the original gene pool. Well, another question I'm often asked. Well, look, you talked about Noah's Ark there, but is there any evidence for a global flood? One of the things that I say to people is this: if there really was a global flood, you'd expect to find billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. By the way, do you know what we find? Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. When I go to the Grand Canyon, I've been there with a park ranger, and you look down and you see all those rock layers and the fossils in the rock layers, and you see the big canyon there. I've stood on the edge of the Grand Canyon with a park ranger who said, "Do you realize a long time and a little bit of water did this?" I stood there and said, "Do you realize a lot of water and a little bit of time did this?" You see, because I believe the layers were laid down by the flood and the canyon was carved out probably at the end of the flood or after the flood. And of course, the park ranger would say, "Oh no, these layers were laid down over millions of years. It takes millions of years to lay down lots of layers." Well, no, that's not true. Not far from where we are at this conference, there's a very famous volcano called Mount St. Helens. And Mount St. Helens erupted on May 18th, 1980. Watch this short video.
On May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens, located 95 miles south of Seattle, Washington.
With Enervon, you get more immunity. May ascorbic acid and more. Tulong para protektado sa sakit dulot ng virus.
Erupted. The eruption was triggered by an earthquake centered beneath the mountain that measured 5.1 on the Richter scale. The lateral blast swept out the north side of Mount St. Helens at 300 miles per hour. With temperatures as high as 660 degrees Fahrenheit and the power of 24 megatons of thermal energy, it snapped 100-year-old trees like toothpicks and stripped them of their bark. Before the famous eruption at Mount St. Helens, scientists were mostly familiar with slow-acting examples of geologic change. But at Mount St. Helens, geologists watched the Earth's surface change quite rapidly. Icebergs were buried in hot avalanche material. They melted and formed badlands in days. Eruptions on May 18 and June 10 produced fine layers in hours. On June 10, mud flows cut zigzag canyons 100 feet deep in soft sand and mud, complete with perpendicular side canyons. Canyons that are reminiscent of the geography of Grand Canyon, only 40 times smaller and clearly produced within hours. Mud flows over the following decade cut hundreds of feet into solid rock in just days of cutting time. Fallen trees formed a log mat on the surface of Spirit Lake and dropped bark to the bottom of the lake, accumulating up to 3 feet of bark peat in just a couple years. And vertically floating logs sinking to the bottom of the lake resulted in buried trees in only a decade, similar to the trees of Yellowstone's fossil forest, which are also buried in volcanic layers. Even though Mount St. Helens is a very small catastrophe compared to the flood or the major catastrophes immediately following the flood, it provides a better clue to what happened in those times than the slow geologic processes which are most commonly seen in the